The day I learned my son and his new bride had changed the locks on my front door was the same day I decided family loyalty had its limits. For 28 years, I'd been both mother and father to Ethan, sacrificing my dreams, my relationships, and my financial security to ensure he had everything he needed. I'd worked double shifts as a high school English teacher and weekend hours as a freelance editor to put him through college debt-free. I'd postponed my own master's degree so he could have braces. I'd chosen to remain in a modest neighborhood, instead of selling when property values soared because he loved the friends, the park, and the sense of community. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. And how did he repay me? By locking me out of my own home 6 weeks after his elaborate wedding to Vanessa, the girl whose family had more money than sense and even less compassion. What they didn't know was that I had something neither of them expected. Something that would turn their perfect little betrayal upside down. I never imagined I'd be sharing a story like this at 57. When you devote your life to raising a child on your own, you never expect them to discard you like yesterday's newspaper. But that's precisely what happened to me. Olivia Bennett. For nearly 3 decades, I taught advanced placement English at Westridge High, shaping young minds while trying to provide stability for my own son. The early years were the hardest. Ethan's father, Michael, abandoned us when our son was only 4. The divorce papers arrived with a note explaining he wasn't cut out for family life and had accepted a position abroad. The child support checks came sporadically at first, then stopped entirely by the time Ethan turned 8. I never told my son his father had simply chosen to stop paying. Instead, I picked up editing work, tutored on weekends, and stretched every dollar until it screamed. "How do you do it all, Liv?" my colleague Diane would ask, watching me grade papers during lunch while planning Ethan's weekend activities. I never had a good answer. There was no secret formula, just the bone-deep determination that my son would never feel the absence of his father in terms of opportunities or experiences. Our small 3-bedroom bungalow on Maple Street became the center of our world. I'd purchased it with the modest inheritance from my grandmother, the down payment barely clearing the bank's requirements. The mortgage payments were steep for a teacher's salary, but the school district was excellent, and I was determined Ethan would have the best education possible. I planted the garden myself, spending precious weekends tending roses and hydrangeas, creating a peaceful sanctuary in our backyard. Every nail I hammered, every shelf I mounted, every room I painted represented hours I could have spent resting, but chose instead to build a home that Ethan could be proud of. This house wasn't merely a structure, it was the embodiment of my love for my son, a physical manifestation of my dedication to giving him the childhood he deserved. When Ethan expressed interest in soccer, I rearranged my tutoring schedule to attend every game. When he joined the debate team in high school, I spent evenings helping him research topics after I'd finished my own lesson planning. When he was accepted to Princeton with a partial scholarship, I remortgaged the house to cover what remained of his tuition. I never let him know. I simply told him his academic achievement had earned him a full ride. "Mom, you're working too hard," he'd occasionally observe during his college breaks, noticing the deepening lines around my eyes. "You need to take better care of yourself." "I'm fine," I'd assure him, hiding the stack of editing projects waiting for me after he went to bed. I'm just passionate about my work. What I was passionate about was ensuring my son never had to worry about money the way I constantly did. I wanted him focused on his dreams, not distracted by financial stress. Perhaps that was my first mistake. Ethan graduated from Princeton with honors and immediately landed a position at a prestigious financial firm in the city. I couldn't have been prouder watching him walk across that stage, knowing every sacrifice had been worth it. He was confident, articulate, and ambitious, everything I had hoped he would become. It was during his second year at the firm that he met Vanessa Harrington. She came from old money, the kind of wealth that spans generations and reshapes not just lifestyles, but expectations. The Harringtons owned property in 3 states, summered on the vineyard, and considered charity. Gallus a regular Tuesday evening commitment. Vanessa was beautiful, cultured, and accustomed to getting exactly what she wanted. I tried to like her. Genuinely, I did. At our first dinner together at a restaurant far outside my normal price range, I listened attentively as she described her work in art acquisition for wealthy clients. I overlooked her subtle glances at my sensible shoes and off-the-rack dress. I ignored the way she referred to my career as charming and so important for shaping young people, as though I were running a quaint hobby rather than sustaining a profession that required 2 advanced degrees. "Ethan tells me you've lived in the same house his entire life," she commented over dessert. "How consistent of you." "I believe in putting down roots," I replied, catching the slight narrowing of her eyes. "There's value in building community." "Of course," she said dismissively. "Though personally, I find change so invigorating. Ethan and I have been discussing relocating to the West Side once we're married. The neighborhoods there are simply transformative." It was the first I'd heard of any engagement, and from Ethan's startled expression, perhaps more concrete than he'd realized as well. But he didn't correct her. Instead, he reached for her hand and smiled in a way I'd never seen before, eager, almost desperate for approval. The engagement became official 3 months later. The wedding planning consumed the next year with costs that made my head spin. The Harringtons insisted on handling most expenses, which Ethan explained was tradition. What wasn't traditional was how thoroughly I was sidelined in the process. Mrs. Bennett, Vanessa's mother, Eleanor, addressed me during one of the few planning sessions I was invited to attend. "We've taken care of the mother of the groom outfit. Nothing to worry about." When the garment bag arrived at my home, it contained a matronly dress in a shade of beige that made me look jaundiced, 3 sizes too large, and clearly intended to minimize my presence in wedding photos. I spent a month's worth of grocery money, having it tailored and subtly dyed to a more flattering tone. The alteration cost was worth every penny when I saw Eleanor's tight smile at the rehearsal dinner. The wedding itself was extravagant beyond reason. 500 guests at the Harrington estate, champagne that cost more per bottle than my monthly car payment, and centerpieces of imported orchids that were discarded immediately after the reception. Throughout the event, I was positioned at a table far from the main party, seated with distant Harrington relatives who spoke primarily of investments and vacation properties. Ethan and Vanessa departed for a 3-week honeymoon across Europe. I returned to my quiet house, to my steadfast roses and the reading nook where I'd spent countless evenings with my son, discussing literature and dreams and the nature of a life well lived. Something felt different now. A chapter had ended, which was natural and right, but the foreshadowing felt ominous in ways I couldn't articulate. When they returned, sunburned and laden with shopping bags from designers I'd only seen in magazines, Ethan announced they would be staying with me, just until the closing on their new house. "New house?" I asked. "You've already found a place?" "Actually," Vanessa interjected, "Daddy handled it while we were away. It's a stunning property in Oakwood Heights. You simply must see the crown molding, Ethan. And the wine cellar is exceptional." Oakwood Heights was one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in the city, where homes regularly sold for 7 figures. I knew Ethan's salary was impressive for someone 3 years into his career, but not that impressive. "That's a beautiful area," I commented carefully. "Quite an investment for your first home." "We're getting family assistance," Ethan replied, not meeting my eyes. The temporary stay stretched from days into weeks. Gradually, changes appeared in my home without consultation. My reading nook was rearranged to accommodate Vanessa's yoga practice. The refrigerator was emptied of my carefully budgeted groceries and refilled with organic specialties that spoiled before they could be eaten. The garden, my sanctuary, was critiqued as untamed and dated. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. You really should consider updating, Olivia, Vanessa suggested one evening as I watered my roses. These traditional plantings are so conventional. Have you thought about xeriscaping? It's much more environmentally conscious. I bit my tongue, reminding myself this arrangement was temporary. Besides, seeing Ethan daily again was worth the minor irritations. Or so I told myself, until the conversations began. They started subtly. Comments about how I must be exhausted, maintaining such a large house on my own. Questions about whether I'd considered downsizing as I approached retirement. Observations about the charming but dated features that would require significant investment to modernize. Real estate in this area has appreciated considerably, Mom, Ethan mentioned over breakfast one Sunday. You're sitting on substantial equity. I'm aware, I replied, pouring more coffee. But this is my home, not an investment property. Vanessa exchanged a glance with Ethan that raised the hair on the back of my neck. Something unspoken passed between them, something that excluded me entirely. The closing on their Oakwood Heights home was delayed repeatedly due to inspection issues that were never clearly explained. Their stay extended to 6 weeks, during which the subtle comments evolved into direct suggestions. We've been thinking. Mom? Ethan began one evening as I graded papers at the dining table. This house really is too much for you to manage alone. I've managed it alone for 24 years, I pointed out, not looking up from my work. But you shouldn't have to, Vanessa interjected, her voice honeyed with false concern. Especially as you get older. Have you seen those lovely adult communities near the lake? They have activities, social events, even gardening clubs. I set down my pen and looked at them directly. Are you suggesting I move into a retirement community? I'm 57 and in excellent health. Of course not a retirement community, Ethan backpedaled. Just something more. Appropriate for your current situation. My current situation, I repeated slowly. And what situation would that be? Being a homeowner with a career, friends, and community connections exactly where I am? The conversation ended awkwardly, but I noticed increased whispering between them afterward. Calls were taken in other rooms. Laptop screens were closed when I entered a space. Something was happening, something that concerned me directly but excluded me entirely. I might have confronted them immediately, but a crisis at school demanded my attention. One of my brightest students had been caught plagiarizing, jeopardizing her college applications. The ensuing meetings with parents, administrators, and the distressed student herself consumed my evenings. By the time I regained my equilibrium at home, Ethan and Vanessa had moved into their new house in Oakwood Heights. The silence that followed their departure was both welcome and disconcerting. I reclaimed my reading nook, restored my garden to its former glory, and tried to ignore the lingering feeling that something fundamental had shifted in my relationship with my son. 2 weeks later, I returned home from school to find a certified letter in my mailbox. The contents were incomprehensible at first reading. Legal language about property transfer, power of attorney, and financial management. I had to read it 3 times before understanding crystallized into a cold, hard knot in my chest. According to this document, I had supposedly granted Ethan power of attorney during a brief hospitalization for pneumonia the previous winter. That much was true. I had signed a medical power of attorney so he could make healthcare decisions if my condition worsened. What I hadn't signed was the comprehensive financial power of attorney that had apparently been executed alongside it. Using this document, Ethan had legally transferred ownership of my house, the home I had purchased, maintained, and poured my heart into for nearly 3 decades, to himself and Vanessa for the sum of $1. The final paragraph informed me that I had 30 days to vacate the premises. My hands shook as I set down the letter. This couldn't be real. My son, my only child, the person I had sacrificed everything for, could not possibly have stolen my home from under me. There had to be a mistake, a misunderstanding, something I was missing. I called Ethan immediately. The call went to voicemail. I texted, then emailed. Hours passed without response. Finally, near midnight, my phone buzzed with a message. "Can't talk now. We'll explain everything soon. Please don't make this difficult." Don't make this difficult? As though I were the one creating a problem by questioning why my home had been stolen through legal manipulation. I barely slept that night. By morning, anger had replaced shock. I called in sick to school for the first time in years and contacted Patricia Rodriguez, an attorney who had been my student 20 years earlier and now specialized in elder law. The irony of needing an elder law attorney at 57 wasn't lost on me. "This is highly questionable, Ms. Bennett," Patricia said after reviewing the documents. "The power of attorney you signed was specifically limited to medical decisions. This comprehensive financial POA appears to have been added afterward, possibly on a separate page with the same signature copied over." "You're saying my son forged my signature?" The words felt like glass in my mouth. Not necessarily forged, but potentially misused a legitimately obtained signature. It's legally problematic and ethically reprehensible. Patricia's expression softened. "I'm so sorry this is happening to you. Unfortunately, I see these situations more often than you'd think. Family members taking advantage of trust and access. What can we do?" I asked, my teacher's pragmatism reasserting itself. "We file for an emergency injunction immediately to halt any further action on the property. Then we challenge the validity of the financial power of attorney and the subsequent property transfer." She hesitated. "I should warn you, these cases can get messy, especially when family is involved." "Ethan made it messy when he stole my house," I replied, a steely determination replacing my initial hurt. "I'm prepared for whatever comes next." What came next was worse than I could have imagined. When Patricia filed the emergency injunction, Ethan and Vanessa responded not with shame or apology, but with escalation. They arrived at my home the following Saturday morning with a locksmith. I opened the door to find them standing on the porch I had painted myself just last summer. Vanessa was wearing sunglasses despite the overcast day, her expression hidden, but her body language radiating impatience. Ethan couldn't meet my eyes. "What's going on?" I asked, though the presence of the uncomfortable-looking locksmith made it painfully obvious. "Mom, please don't make a scene," Ethan said quietly. "We've been trying to handle this delicately." "Delicately?" I repeated. "You steal my home through fraudulent means and call that delicate?" "We didn't steal anything," Vanessa interjected, pushing her sunglasses up to reveal cold eyes. "Ethan has power of attorney, which you willingly signed. The transfer was completely legal." "We filed an injunction yesterday challenging that very claim," I informed her, a small satisfaction blooming at her momentary surprise. "Any property transfer is on hold pending legal review." Ethan stepped forward, lowering his voice. "Mom, be reasonable. This house is too large for you. The maintenance is becoming a burden. You're approaching retirement age with inadequate savings. We're trying to help you secure your future." "By making me homeless?" I challenged. "Some help." "Not homeless," Vanessa corrected with exaggerated patience. "We've found you a lovely condo in Lakeview Village. It's a 55-plus community with amenities you couldn't possibly afford otherwise. You should be thanking us for our foresight." The locksmith shifted uncomfortably behind them, clearly wishing to be anywhere else. "I'm not going anywhere," I stated firmly. "This is my home, purchased with my money, maintained with my labor. I suggest you leave before this becomes even more embarrassing for all of us." "Actually, Mom," Ethan said, producing a document from his jacket pocket, "we have a court order authorizing us to secure the property pending the outcome of your challenge. You can gather essential items today, but we'll need to change the locks for security purposes." I snatched the paper from his hand, scanning it quickly. It appeared legitimate, a temporary order allowing them to secure the property against damage or alteration while ownership was disputed. My hands trembled with rage and disbelief. You're locking me out of my own home? The home where I raised you? Where I taught you to read? Where I bandaged your knees and helped with your homework and celebrated every milestone of your life? For the first time, Ethan looked uncomfortable. It's temporary, Mom, just until the legal situation is resolved. Which could take months, I pointed out. Where exactly am I supposed to go in the meantime? Vanessa stepped forward, extending a glossy brochure. As we mentioned, we've arranged accommodations at Lakeview Village. They have a furnished unit available immediately. All your essential needs will be covered. I didn't take the brochure. And my job? Lakeview is 30 miles from my school. Perhaps this is the perfect opportunity to consider early retirement, Vanessa suggested, as though offering a gift. You've mentioned how demanding teaching has become. This would allow you to pursue your hobbies. Teaching wasn't my job. It was my calling, my passion. The suggestion that I should abandon my students mid-year to accommodate their theft was the final insult. I'll need time to pack, I said coldly, my mind already racing ahead to what Patricia had told me about evidence gathering. We can help, Ethan offered, seemingly relieved by my apparent capitulation. No, I'll handle it myself. I stepped back inside and closed the door in their faces. I had 2 hours before they returned. I moved methodically through the house, gathering not just clothing and toiletries, but critical documents, the original deed, home insurance policies, tax records, and most importantly, the actual medical power of attorney I had signed, which I kept in my fireproof lockbox. I photographed rooms, closets, and possessions as evidence of what the house contained. When Ethan and Vanessa returned with the locksmith, I was waiting with 2 suitcases and a cold composure that concealed the volcanic rage beneath. Your things, Ethan began awkwardly. Whatever you can't take today, we'll store carefully until... Until what? I interrupted. Until you decide what of mine you want to keep and what to discard? No, thank you. I'll be sending professional movers for my belongings within the week. That won't be necessary, Vanessa interjected smoothly. We've already arranged for everything to be cataloged and properly stored. Cataloged by whom? According to whose judgment of value? The silverware that belonged to my grandmother may look tarnished to you, but it's irreplaceable to me. My voice remained steady through force of will alone. Mom, please, Ethan tried again. We're not the enemies here. We're trying to help secure your future. I looked at my son, this stranger wearing the face of the boy I had raised, and felt a peculiar calm settle over me. My future was secure until you decided to steal my home. Don't expect me to thank you for solving a problem you created. I walked past them to my car, loading my suitcases without assistance. As I prepared to drive away from my own home, now inaccessible to me, I saw the locksmith already changing the deadbolt. Ethan stood watching, his expression unreadable. Vanessa had already gone inside. To begin measuring for renovations, I had no doubt. I didn't go to Lakeview Village. Instead, I drove to Diane's house, my colleague and friend of 20 years. When I explained what had happened, her outrage matched my own. Stay here as long as you need, she insisted, showing me to her guest room. This is absolutely unconscionable. That night, lying in an unfamiliar bed surrounded by someone else's possessions, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. My son, the center of my universe for nearly 3 decades, had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. The pain was physical, a hollowness beneath my ribs that seemed to expand with each breath. But beneath the pain, something else was building. Something I had suppressed for years in service to being a good mother. Anger. And with that anger came clarity. I had spent my entire adult life putting Ethan first, his education, his opportunities, his future. I had worked multiple jobs, postponed my own dreams, stretched every dollar to breaking. I had never complained, never burdened him with our financial realities, never made him feel responsible for my sacrifices. And perhaps that had been my greatest mistake. In trying to give him everything, I had inadvertently taught him that my needs, my home, my very autonomy were less important than his desires. I had raised a son who could, with apparent clear conscience, steal his mother's home because it better served his and his wife's purposes. As painful as this realization was, it was also liberating. For the first time in decades, I didn't have to consider how my actions would affect Ethan. I didn't have to moderate my response to protect his feelings or stability. I could finally put myself first. The next morning, I called Patricia from Diane's kitchen. "I've gathered all the original documentation," I told her, "and I have something else you should know. Something that changes everything about this situation." "What's that?" Patricia asked. I smiled for the first time since receiving that certified letter. "The house they think they've stolen. It's not actually the property they believe it is, and I'm ready to show them exactly who they're dealing with." Patricia stared at me across her desk, legal pad covered in neat handwriting. "Let me understand this correctly, Olivia. You're saying the property deed that Ethan and Vanessa think they've acquired through this questionable power of attorney isn't actually what they believe it is?" "Exactly," I confirmed, opening my folder of documents. The street address they used in the transfer paperwork, 240 Maple Street, technically isn't accurate. The legal property description is different. I slid across the original deed to my home, pointing to the precise legal language. When I had purchased the property 28 years ago, it had actually consisted of 2 adjacent lots that had been combined by the previous owner. The official property records listed it as Lots 12 and 13, Block 14 of Westridge Edition. The house sits primarily on Lot 12, but the property extends across both lots, I explained. When Ethan filed the transfer documents, he used only the street address, which creates ambiguity about exactly what property was transferred. Patricia's eyes widened as she examined the documents. This is significant. The legal description in a deed takes precedence over the street address when there's any discrepancy. The transfer Ethan executed may only apply to part of your property, not the entirety. "There's more," I continued, feeling a surge of confidence. 3 years ago, I completed the process of legally subdividing the lots back into their original configuration, with the house entirely on Lot 12. I never mentioned it to Ethan because it was part of my retirement planning, eventually selling the empty lot for additional income while keeping my home. "Did you record the subdivision with the county?" Patricia asked, excitement creeping into her professional demeanor. "Yes, but under my maiden name, Olivia Marshall. It was actually an error by the county clerk that I never bothered to correct. The subdivision documentation exists in public records, but it wouldn't appear in a standard title search under Bennett." Patricia leaned back in her chair, a slow smile spreading across her face. "So, if I understand correctly, Ethan and his wife believe they've gained ownership of your entire property at 240 Maple Street, but legally, they may have only acquired Lot 12, while you still retain ownership of Lot 13 under your maiden name. And critically, access to the street from the house requires crossing Lot 13. "Precisely." I couldn't suppress my own smile. "They can't even legally approach the house without crossing property I still own." "This changes our approach entirely," Patricia said, already typing notes into her computer. "We still challenge the fraudulent power of attorney, but now we also file a separate action affirming your ownership of Lot 13 and potentially seeking an injunction against them trespassing on your remaining property." For the first time since receiving that certified letter, I felt a spark of hope. The subdivision had been a practical financial decision, creating the option to sell the side lot to supplement my retirement when the time came. I never imagined It would become my leverage against my own son's betrayal. How quickly can we move on this? I asked. I'll file emergency motions today. But Olivia, Patricia cautioned, this doesn't immediately get you back into your home. It creates a legal complication that strengthens our case, but the process will still take time. I understand, I replied. But it gives me something I didn't have yesterday, a fighting chance. The next week passed in a blur of legal filings, substitute lesson plans for my classes, and the disorienting experience of living out of a suitcase in Diane's guest room. I continued teaching, finding solace in my classroom where decades of experience allowed me to function on autopilot while my personal life imploded. My students noticed something was wrong despite my efforts to maintain normalcy. Ms. Bennett, are you okay? Asked Emma, one of my AP Literature seniors, after I momentarily lost my place during our discussion of King Lear. Ironically, a play centered on a parent betrayed by their children. Just a bit distracted, I assured her with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Now where were we? Ah, yes, the concept of filial ingratitude. The irony wasn't lost on me. For 30 years, I'd taught teenagers about the great themes of literature: betrayal, justice, redemption, the consequences of moral failure, never expecting these archetypes to play out so dramatically in my own life. 10 days after being locked out of my home, I received a text from Ethan. We need to talk about your belongings. When can you provide a list of what you want us to store for you? I showed the message to Patricia during our update meeting that afternoon. Don't respond yet, she advised. The county recorder's office confirmed this morning that the subdivision filing under your maiden name is valid and still in effect. Lot 13 remains legally yours. The judge has granted our emergency hearing for tomorrow morning. Let's see how that plays out before engaging with Ethan. The following morning, I sat beside Patricia in a wood-paneled courtroom, watching as Ethan and Vanessa entered with their attorney, a polished man in an expensive suit who exuded confidence. Ethan noticed me but quickly averted his eyes. Vanessa stared straight ahead, chin lifted slightly, as though the proceedings were a minor inconvenience in her otherwise perfect life. Judge Harriet Simmons, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, reviewed the filings with methodical precision. When she looked up, her gaze fixed first on Ethan's attorney. Mr. Donovan, your clients have executed a property transfer based on a power of attorney that Ms. Bennett alleges was fraudulently obtained or misused. That's concerning enough. But now we have additional complications regarding exactly what property was legally transferred. Please explain to the court why I shouldn't grant the emergency injunction as requested. Mr. Donovan rose smoothly. Your Honor, my clients acted in good faith, believing the power of attorney granted by Ms. Bennett during her hospitalization last winter was comprehensive in nature. As for the property description, the transfer clearly intended to include the entirety of 240 Maple Street, as recognized by common understanding and decades of use. Judge Simmons turned to Patricia. Ms. Rodriguez, your response. Patricia stood. Your Honor, we have provided documentation showing that the original power of attorney was specifically limited to medical decisions, not financial matters. More importantly, county records clearly show that Ms. Bennett legally subdivided the property 3 years ago. Lot 13, which provides the only access route to the house from Maple Street, remains solely in Ms. Bennett's ownership under her maiden name and was never included in any transfer, fraudulent or otherwise. The judge examined the documents again, her expression unreadable. After what seemed an eternity, she looked up. I am granting the emergency injunction. The defendants are prohibited from changing locks, removing possessions, or otherwise restricting Ms. Bennett's access to the property pending full resolution of the ownership dispute. She fixed Ethan and Vanessa with a stern look. Furthermore, I am ordering that the alleged property transfer be held in abeyance until this court can fully examine the circumstances under which the power of attorney was obtained and executed. Mr. Donovan attempted to object, but Judge Simmons raised her hand. Additionally, based on the documented subdivision, I am affirming that Lot 13 remains the legal property of Olivia Marshall Bennett, regardless of any claim to the structure, at 240 Maple Street. The defendants are hereby prohibited from entering or crossing Lot 13 without the express permission of the owner. I watched as the implications of this ruling registered on Ethan's face. His confident expression crumbled into confusion, then dismay as he leaned over to whisper urgently to his attorney. Ms. Bennett is to be provided access to her home and possessions immediately, Judge Simmons continued. A court officer will accompany her this afternoon to ensure compliance. We will reconvene for a full hearing in 2 weeks. She banged her dockwork gavel, effectively ending the discussion. As we exited the courtroom, Ethan hurried to intercept me in the hallway. Mom, wait, we need to talk about this. I stopped, facing my son for the first time since he had locked me out of my own home. Yes, Ethan, we certainly do. Vanessa joined him, her composure slipping. This is ridiculous. You can't possibly expect us to take this seriously. It's just a legal technicality. A legal technicality, I repeated slowly. Like the way you used a medical power of attorney to fraudulently seize my home. That kind of technicality. We were trying to help you, Ethan insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. No, I corrected him. You were helping yourselves. To my property. Property that I purchased, maintained, and paid taxes on for nearly 3 decades. Property where I raised you alone after your father abandoned us. Property that represents my life's work and financial security. The judge clearly doesn't understand the situation, Vanessa interjected. Once we explain, the judge understands perfectly, Patricia interrupted, stepping to my side. And unless you want to risk contempt charges, I suggest you comply. With her order immediately. We'll meet you at the property at 2 o'clock with the court officer. As they walked away, Ethan glanced back once, his expression a complex mixture of anger, confusion, and something that might have been shame. For a moment, I glimpsed the little boy who had once looked to me for everything, guidance, comfort, approval. The boy I had sacrificed everything for. But that boy was gone, replaced by a man who had been willing to make his mother homeless for convenience or financial gain. At precisely 2 o'clock, I stood on the sidewalk in front of my home, accompanied by Patricia and a court officer named Martinez. The property looked different somehow, not physically changed in the 2 weeks I'd been locked out, but altered in my perception. What had once represented safety and achievement now felt tainted by betrayal. Ethan emerged from the house alone, his expression carefully neutral. Vanessa had a prior engagement, he explained, not meeting my eyes. How convenient, I remarked. The court order requires that all locks be returned to their original state, and all keys provided to me immediately. Wordlessly, Ethan handed over a set of keys. Officer Martinez verified that they worked on all exterior doors before nodding to me. You can enter your home now, Ms. Bennett. Stepping across the threshold felt surreal. Everything looked the same yet fundamentally altered, like returning to a childhood home as an adult. I moved methodically through each room, noting with relief that my possessions appeared untouched. The books in my reading nook remained arranged by author, my grandmother's quilt still draped across the back of the sofa. The family photos, including dozens of Ethan through his childhood and adolescence, stood exactly where I had placed them. You need to understand what's happening here, Mom, Ethan said, following me into the living room. Vanessa and I were trying to secure your future. The Oakwood Heights house was more expensive than we anticipated. The monthly payments are substantial. You needed my property to subsidize your lifestyle, I finished for him. So rather than asking for help or exploring other options, you decided to simply take my home through deception. It wasn't like that, he protested weakly. What was it like then? I challenged, turning to face him directly. Explain to me how stealing my home through fraudulent means was actually a generous act on your part. He had no answer, just as I suspected. After Officer Martinez confirmed that the property appeared undisturbed and my access had been restored, he and Patricia prepared to leave. "Do you want me to stay?" Patricia asked quietly. "You don't have to be alone with him." "Oh, I'll be fine," I assured her. "This conversation is long overdue." Once we were alone, Ethan's facade of calm cracked. "This doesn't change anything, you know. The judge only issued a temporary order. When we get to the full hearing, our attorney will argue that the subdivision was executed without proper notice to interested parties." "Interested parties?" I repeated. "You weren't an interested party in my property 3 years ago, Ethan. You were building your career in the city, visiting occasionally on holidays. I made a sound financial decision regarding property I owned outright." "You should have consulted me," he insisted. "The way you consulted me before transferring my home to yourself and Vanessa?" Ethan flushed. "That was different." "Yes, it certainly was. I made a legal subdivision of property I owned. You executed a fraudulent document to steal a home that wasn't yours." He paced the living room, running his hands through his hair in the same gesture he'd had since childhood, when frustrated. "You don't understand the pressure we're under. The mortgage on Oakwood Heights is enormous. Vanessa's father helped with the down payment, but the monthly costs are still challenging on my salary alone. Vanessa's art acquisition business isn't as profitable as she expected yet." "So your solution was to make me homeless?" I asked bluntly. "Not homeless," he countered. "We found you a nice place at Lakeview Village." "A nice place 30 miles from my job and community? Did you consider what that would mean for my daily life? For my career? For my social connections? Or did you only think about how my house could solve your financial problems?" His silence was answer enough. "Where is this Oakwood Heights house exactly?" I asked, changing tactics. Ethan looked confused by the shift. "It's in the northeastern section of the development, 78 Hillcrest Drive." "Why?" "Just curious about where my involuntary contribution to your lifestyle was going," I replied evenly. Something in my tone made him pause. "What does that mean?" "It means I raised you better than this, Ethan. Or at least I thought I did. I'm disappointed not just in your actions, but in the man you've apparently become, someone who would sacrifice his mother's security and happiness for personal gain." The words landed like physical blows. Ethan had always cared deeply about my approval, from his earliest school achievements to his college selection. Even as an adult, he sought my validation of his career moves and life choices. Now, faced with my explicit disappointment, he seemed to shrink before my eyes. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way," he said quietly. "We thought you'd understand once it was done, that you'd see we were trying to help you downsize to something more manageable. If you genuinely believed that, you would have discussed it with me openly, not executed legal documents behind my back." He had no response to this simple truth. "I'd like you to leave now," I said, suddenly exhausted by the conversation. "I need time to process everything that's happened." "What about the hearing in 2 weeks?" he asked. "What about it?" "Are you really going to fight us on this? Create a public legal battle? It will be messy, Mom. Expensive for everyone." His attempt at intimidation might have worked on the woman I was 2 weeks ago, the mother who prioritized peace and her son's well-being above all else. But that woman had been locked out of her home, betrayed by the child she'd sacrificed everything for. Yes, Ethan, I am going to fight. With every resource and every breath I have. You chose this battle when you decided to steal my home instead of having an honest conversation. Now you'll face the consequences of that choice. After he left, I walked slowly through each room, reacquainting myself with the space that had been mine for nearly 3 decades. The house felt different now, violated in ways that had nothing to do with physical changes. The reading nook, where I'd spent countless evenings grading papers while Ethan did homework nearby. The kitchen, where I'd taught him to cook his first meal. the backyard where he'd practiced soccer until dusk. Every corner held memories now tainted by his betrayal. I called Diane to let her know I'd regained access to my home. "Do you want me to come over?" she offered. "You shouldn't be alone after everything that's happened." "I'm okay," I assured her, though okay was hardly accurate. "I need some time to think." After hanging up, I made tea and settled into my favorite chair by the front window. From this spot, I had watched Ethan board the school bus his first day of kindergarten, waving bravely while fighting tears. I had watched him pace the front walk, waiting for his first date to arrive, nervously adjusting his collar. I had watched him leave for college, the car packed with belongings, his face a mixture of excitement and apprehension about the future. Now I sat in the same chair, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, and considered my own future. The emergency injunction had bought me time and leverage, but the fight was far from over. Ethan and Vanessa, backed by the Harrington family resources, would not easily concede defeat. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Great news. County assessor confirmed subdivision is fully legal and recorded properly. Also found something interesting about Oakwood Heights development. Call me tomorrow." I set down the phone, intrigued but too emotionally drained to process more information tonight. Instead, I allowed myself to fully feel the grief that had been building since receiving that certified letter. Grief not just for the betrayal itself, but for the relationship that would never be the same. The unconditional trust between mother and child had been shattered, perhaps irreparably. Yet beneath the grief, another emotion was growing stronger: determination. I had raised Ethan alone, built a career, maintained this home, and created a meaningful life through sheer persistence and hard work. Those same qualities would serve me now in fighting for what was rightfully mine. The next morning, I woke in my own bed for the first time in 2 weeks, feeling more centered despite the circumstances. After a quick breakfast, I called Patricia to learn what she'd discovered about Oakwood Heights. "The development company that built those homes is Harrington Estates," she explained, excitement evident in her voice. "As in Eleanor Harrington, Vanessa's mother, the family real estate business." "So Vanessa's family built the house they purchased?" I clarified, not yet seeing the significance. "Yes, but here's where it gets interesting. According to county records, the specific property at 78 Hillcrest Drive was never actually transferred to the development company's inventory for sale. It remains registered to Harrington Holdings LLC, the parent company controlled by the family." "Meaning what, exactly?" "Meaning Ethan and Vanessa likely don't own that house either. They're probably living there under some family arrangement that isn't reflected in public records. There's no mortgage recorded because there was no actual sale." The implications were staggering. So their claim that they needed my house to help with their expensive mortgage payments was completely fabricated, Patricia finished. "There is no mortgage on 78 Hillcrest Drive, at least not one recorded with the county as legally required." I sat down, processing this new information. They lied about needing financial help with a mortgage that doesn't exist, then tried to steal my home through fraudulent means. Exactly. And it strengthens our case considerably. They can't claim financial necessity if there's no actual financial burden. "What's our next step?" I asked, my resolve hardening. "We continue preparing for the hearing, but now with additional evidence of deceptive intent. I've also requested financial records related to the power of attorney filing. If Ethan used your information without authorization, there could be additional legal implications." After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table, staring out at the garden I had tended for decades. The roses needed pruning. The hydrangeas were overdue for their fall cutting back. Small, ordinary tasks that had defined my quiet life before it had been upended by betrayal. I had 2 weeks until the full hearing, 2 weeks to prepare for a legal battle against my only child. The thought should have devastated me, but instead it filled me with a cold clarity. Whatever emotional manipulation Ethan and Vanessa attempted, whatever financial advantage the Harringtons possessed, they had made a critical mistake in underestimating me. They saw a middle-aged English teacher approaching retirement, an easy target for their scheme. They didn't see the woman who had raised a child alone while building a career, who had balanced budgets when there wasn't enough money to go around, who had navigated the complexities of single parenthood in a society that often rendered such women invisible. They thought they were dealing with just a mother who would sacrifice anything for her child. They were about to discover they were dealing with a woman who had finally reached her limit. The following weekend, I decided to visit Oakwood Heights. I needed to see this house that had somehow justified, in Ethan and Vanessa's minds, the theft of my home. The development was as exclusive as I'd imagined: gated entrance, manicured common areas, houses that appeared lifted from architectural magazines rather than designed for actual living. At the security kiosk, I explained I was visiting my son at 78 Hillcrest Drive. The guard called to confirm, and to my surprise, Ethan authorized my entry without hesitation. The house itself was imposing. A modernist structure of glass, steel, and stone that seemed designed to intimidate rather than welcome. Nothing about it felt like Ethan, who had always preferred cozy spaces and warm materials. It felt like Vanessa, like the Harringtons, like wealth displayed for its own sake. Ethan met me at the door, clearly surprised despite having approved my visit. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "I wanted to see the house that was apparently worth destroying our relationship over," I replied honestly. He hesitated, then stepped aside to let me enter. The interior was as cold as the exterior: minimalist furnishings, abstract art, a distinct absence of anything personal or lived in. It resembled a high-end hotel more than a home. "Vanessa's not here," Ethan said, as though warning me. "She's at a gallery opening with her mother." "I didn't come to see Vanessa," I clarified. "I came to understand what was happening from all angles before the hearing." He led me through the main floor, pointing out features with an enthusiasm that felt forced: the imported Italian marble, the smart home technology, the wine cellar designed by some renowned expert. None of it seemed to bring him joy, just status. In the kitchen, sleek, white, and appearing never used, I finally asked the question that had been haunting me. "Why did you do it, Ethan? Really? Not the excuses about helping me downsize or securing my future, the actual reason." He stared out the wall of windows overlooking a perfectly landscaped backyard. "It's complicated." "I have time," I replied, settling onto one of the uncomfortable-looking bar stools at the kitchen island. Ethan sighed, the confident financial analyst facade cracking to reveal glimpses of the boy I'd raised. After the wedding, things changed. Vanessa had certain expectations about our lifestyle. Her parents, especially Eleanor, made it clear what success should look like for a Harrington spouse. "And that included taking your mother's home?" "No, not initially, but when we started looking at houses, Eleanor kept pushing us toward more expensive properties, neighborhoods with the right addresses. This house," he gestured around the sterile kitchen, "was her choice, not ours. She arranged everything through the family company." "Including the non-existent mortgage?" I asked pointedly. Ethan's head snapped up. "What do you mean?" "There's no mortgage recorded on this property, Ethan. We checked county records. This house is owned by Harrington Holdings, LLC. You're living here under some family arrangement, not a traditional purchase." He paled slightly. "How did you—" "Basic legal research," I interrupted. "The same kind you should have done before attempting to steal my home based on a fraudulent claim of financial necessity." "It wasn't fraudulent," he protested weakly. "There are financial arrangements, payments to the family company. But not a mortgage that was straining your finances to the breaking point, necessitating the appropriation of my property." He had no response to this. "Did Vanessa know?" I asked. About the power of attorney being limited to medical decisions? About you extending it without authorization? Ethan looked away. She suggested we look into options for the house after seeing how much equity you had built up. Her father mentioned that powers of attorney sometimes have broad interpretations. So, the entire Harrington family was involved in planning this? Not exactly. They made suggestions. They introduced us to their attorney. He hesitated. They made it clear that joining their family meant maintaining certain appearances, regardless of the financial reality behind them. I studied my son, the set of his shoulders, the tension around his eyes, the way he couldn't quite meet my gaze. For the first time, I wondered if he was as much a victim of the Harringtons as I was, albeit in a different way. Had he been manipulated? By their wealth and status? Their implicit promises of access to a world he'd never known? But then I remembered the locksmith on my porch. Ethan standing by while I was barred from my own home. His willingness to make me homeless rather than disappoint his new in-laws. The hearing is in 10 days, I said, standing to leave. I suggest you consider very carefully what you want the judge to hear about how this situation developed. As I walked to the door, Ethan called after me. Mom, wait. Isn't there some way we can resolve this privately? Some compromise that keeps this out of court? I turned back, meeting his eyes directly. Yes, Ethan, there is. You can withdraw the fraudulent property transfer, acknowledge in writing that the power of attorney was misused, and apologize publicly for attempting to take my home. Do you find that acceptable? His silence was answer enough. That's what I thought, I said quietly. I'll see you in court. As I drove away from Oakwood Heights, the pieces were finally falling into place. This wasn't just about Ethan and Vanessa wanting my property for financial gain. It was about the Harringtons' influence, their expectations, and their apparent belief that their wealth entitled them to whatever they desired, regardless of legality or morality. They had underestimated me, seeing only a high school English teacher with limited resources. They were about to discover how thoroughly they had misjudged the situation. And me. The 10 days leading up to the hearing passed in a blur of preparation. Patricia and I met daily, reviewing documents, practicing my testimony, and strengthening our case with each new piece of evidence. The discovery about the Harrington family's ownership of 78 Hillcrest Drive had opened unexpected avenues of investigation that Patricia pursued with relentless determination. The Harringtons have a pattern of questionable property transfers, she explained during one of our sessions, spreading documents across her desk. Over the past decade, they've been involved in at least 3 other situations where elderly, relatives or family connections were persuaded to sign over properties to Harrington Holdings under dubious circumstances. Were any of those cases contested? I asked. One was by the son of an elderly widow who was Eleanor Harrington's second cousin. The case was settled privately before reaching court. Patricia's expression hardened. The documentation suggests the Harringtons paid a substantial sum to keep the details confidential. They bought silence, I translated. Exactly. But they can't buy yours unless you allow it. I had returned to teaching, finding solace in my classroom routines while my personal life remained in turmoil. My students' excitement about literature, their thoughtful analyses of texts, and their unabashed optimism about the future anchored me when little else did. If they noticed that our discussions of betrayal in King Lear had become more impassioned, they attributed it to my usual enthusiasm for Shakespeare. 3 days before the hearing, I received a text from Ethan. We need to talk before Thursday. Please. After consulting with Patricia, I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop halfway between our homes, neutral territory where neither of us would have the psychological advantage of home ground. I arrived early, selecting a table in the corner that offered privacy without isolation. Ethan appeared precisely on time, looking harried and less polished than I'd seen him in years. Thank you for meeting me, he began, cradling his coffee, cupped like a lifeline. I've been thinking constantly about our situation. Our situation, I repeated. That's an interesting way to describe your attempt to steal my home. He winced. Mom, please. I'm trying to find a way forward here. I'm listening. Ethan took a deep breath. I spoke with our attorney yesterday. He says our position has weakened considerably since the emergency hearing. The subdivision documentation is legally sound. Your partial ownership creates complications that could drag out the process for months. Yes, I agreed, keeping my expression neutral. That's an accurate assessment. He suggested we consider a settlement. Ethan slid a folder across the table. These are the terms we're proposing. I opened the folder and scanned the document inside, a formal settlement offer on the letterhead of Donovan Legal Group. The language was dense with legal terminology, but the essential points were clear. They would withdraw the property transfer, claim in exchange for a 5-year lease agreement that would allow them to use the property as they wished, while paying me a monthly fee substantially below market rate. I closed the folder and slid it back. No. Mom, be reasonable, Ethan urged. This gives you guaranteed income while allowing us to still effectively take my home from me, I finished. The answer is no, Ethan. I'm not interested in a settlement that forces me to surrender my property rights for your convenience. This is Vanessa's family's final offer, he said, an edge of desperation entering his voice. If we go to court, they're prepared to fight this all the way to the state Supreme Court if necessary. They have the resources for a prolonged legal battle. Do you? The thinly veiled threat might have intimidated me a month ago. Now, it merely confirmed what I already suspected about the Harringtons' approach to anyone who stood in their way. I have something better than unlimited resources, I replied calmly. I have the truth, the law, and decades of ethical conduct on my side. Your in-laws may be accustomed to bullying people into submission, but they'll find I'm not easily intimidated. Ethan's expression shifted from frustration to genuine concern. Mom, you don't understand who you're dealing with. Eleanor Harrington doesn't lose. Ever. She has connections throughout the county, judges, commissioners, business leaders. This won't end well if you force a confrontation. Are you threatening me? I'm warning you, he corrected urgently. Eleanor has already started asking questions about your teaching career, your finances, your friends. She's looking for pressure points. A chill ran through me at the thought of the Harringtons investigating my life, seeking vulnerabilities to exploit. But beneath the momentary fear, anger kindled, not just at their tactics, but at my son's complicity in them. Do you hear yourself, Ethan? You're sitting across from your mother, the woman who raised you alone, warning her that your wife's family is planning to destroy her life because she had the audacity to fight back when you tried to steal her home. What happened to the boy I raised, the one who understood right from wrong? He flinched as though I'd struck him. It's more complicated than that. Actually, it's remarkably simple, I countered. You made choices that hurt me profoundly. Now you're facing the consequences of those choices. Nothing about that is complicated. They'll make it ugly, he persisted. They'll dig into everything. Your finances, your personal life, anything they can use. Let them. I gathered my purse, preparing to leave. I've lived a straightforward life, Ethan. I've worked hard, paid my bills, and treated others with respect. I have nothing to hide. Can the Harringtons say the same? Mom, please. I'll see you in court on Thursday, I said, standing. And, Ethan, you might want to consider which side of the courtroom you really belong on. As I walked away, I heard him call after me, but I didn't turn back. The boy I had raised was still in there somewhere, trapped beneath layers of Harrington, influence, and his own compromised values. Whether he could find his way back to himself remained to be seen. My responsibility now was to protect myself, not to shield him from the consequences of his choices. On the morning of the hearing, I woke before dawn. Sleep had been elusive. my mind cycling through potential scenarios for the day ahead. I dressed with particular care in a tailored navy suit I'd purchased for graduation ceremonies, my one concession to formal professional attire. Around my neck, I fastened the silver pendant my students had given me when I received the district's Teacher of Excellence Award 5 years earlier. It wasn't valuable in monetary terms, but it represented something the Harringtons couldn't buy or steal. Genuine respect earned through years of meaningful work. Patricia met me on the courthouse steps, her confidence providing a steadying counterpoint to my nervous energy. "We've got this," she assured me. "The documentation is irrefutable. Judge Simmons has a reputation for seeing through exactly the kind of manipulation the Harringtons have attempted." Inside, the courtroom was more crowded than I'd expected. Ethan and Vanessa sat at the respondents' table with Mr. Donovan and another attorney I didn't recognize. Behind them, Eleanor and Gerald Harrington occupied the first row of public seating, their expressions imperious and entitled. Eleanor's gaze, when it found mine, contained nothing but cold dismissal. I was an inconvenience to be eliminated, not a person with legitimate rights or feelings. More surprising were the faces I recognized in the rows behind us. Diane, of course, but also several colleagues from Westridge High, former students who had heard about the case through social media, even Principal Michaels, who had adjusted his schedule to attend. Their presence warmed me in ways I couldn't articulate. Judge Simmons entered promptly at 9, her manner brisk and focused. After preliminary statements from both attorneys, she addressed the court directly. "This case involves serious allegations of fraud, misuse of legal instruments, and potential elder exploitation. I expect all parties to present their evidence clearly and factually." Her gaze swept across the respondents' table. "Mr. Donovan, given that the emergency injunction granted 2 weeks ago established prima facie evidence supporting Ms. Bennett's claims, the burden now shifts to your clients to demonstrate why this court should not make that injunction permanent." Mr. Donovan rose with practiced smoothness. "Your Honor, my clients acted with the sincere belief that the power of attorney executed by Ms. Bennett granted comprehensive authority to manage her affairs, including property transfers that would ultimately benefit her financially. The proposed settlement we've submitted demonstrates their continuing commitment to ensuring Ms. Bennett's economic security." Judge Simmons's expression remained neutral. "And the subdivision issue? The property transfer described only the street address, not the specific legal description." "A clerical oversight, Your Honor. The intention was clearly to transfer the entire property known as 240 Maple Street, consistent with decades of use and recognition." "Intent does not override legal documentation, Mr. Donovan," the judge observed dryly. "Ms. Rodriguez, your response?" Patricia stood. "Your Honor, we have documentation proving that the power of attorney Ms. Bennett signed was specifically limited to medical decisions during her hospitalization last winter. We have the original signed document, which Mr. Bennett somehow managed to convert into a comprehensive financial power of attorney without Ms. Bennett's knowledge or consent." She placed the documents on the evidence table. "Furthermore, we have proof that Mr. Bennett was aware of the property subdivision, as he was present when Ms. Bennett discussed the matter with her financial advisor 3 years ago. This wasn't an oversight, but a deliberate attempt to seize property through deceptive means." The hearing proceeded methodically through evidence presentations. Patricia introduced the original medical power of attorney with its clearly limited scope, county records confirming my legal subdivision of the property 3 years earlier, and documentation from my financial advisor noting Ethan's presence during our discussion of the subdivision as part of my retirement planning. When Mr. Donovan attempted to argue that Ethan's presence at one meeting didn't establish knowledge of the subdivision's legal implications, Patricia produced the bombshell she had been saving. Emails between Ethan and Vanessa discussing the subdivision explicitly, dated 2 months before they executed the fraudulent transfer. "How did you obtain these emails?" Judge Simmons asked sharply. They were sent from Ethan Bennett's personal account to Ms. Bennett's email by mistake, Patricia explained. Apparently, Mr. Bennett was attempting to email V. Bennett, and his mother's contact, Vivian Bennett, appeared first in his address book. Ms. Bennett received these communications inadvertently but legally. I watched Ethan's face drain of color as the emails were entered into evidence. Vanessa leaned over to whisper furiously to Mr. Donovan, who appeared increasingly uncomfortable as the hearing progressed. When it came time for testimony, I took the stand first, recounting the history of my home purchase, my financial planning including the subdivision, and the shock of receiving notice that my property had been transferred without my knowledge or consent. Did you ever intend for Ethan Bennett to have authority over your financial or property matters? Patricia asked. Absolutely not, I replied firmly. The only document I signed was a medical power of attorney during my hospitalization for pneumonia last winter. It was limited to healthcare decisions in the event my condition worsened and I became unable to communicate my wishes. And did you ever discuss transferring your property to your son and his wife? Never. I had no intention of selling or transferring my home. The subdivision was part of my retirement planning, eventually selling the empty lot while keeping my home. Ethan was aware of this plan. During cross-examination, Mr. Donovan attempted to characterize me as a mother resistant to change, unwilling to acknowledge my advancing age and the challenges of maintaining a large property alone. Isn't it true, Ms. Bennett, that your son expressed concerns about your ability to manage the property as you approach retirement age? He expressed opinions, not legitimate concerns, I corrected. I am 57 years old, in excellent health, employed full-time as a teacher, and have maintained my property impeccably for 28 years without assistance. There was no rational basis for his claimed concern. But wouldn't you agree that a smaller, more manageable property would be sensible as you age? That decision would be mine to make when and if I determine it's necessary, I replied evenly. Not my son's to impose through fraudulent legal maneuvers. Ethan's testimony followed, and I felt a complex mixture of emotions watching him take the stand. He appeared nervous. His usual confidence diminished as he faced questions about his actions. Mr. Bennett, Patricia began, please explain to the court how your mother's signature on a medical power of attorney transformed into your authority to transfer her property. Ethan glanced toward Vanessa and her parents before answering. I believed the document covered financial matters as well. Our attorney advised that powers of attorney can be interpreted broadly. Which attorney advised you? The one who helped you execute the property transfer? Yes, Mr. Donovan said. Objection, Mr. Donovan interrupted. Attorney-client privilege. Sustained, Judge Simmons ruled. Ms. Rodriguez, rephrase. Patricia nodded. Mr. Bennett, did you discuss the limits of your authority under the power of attorney with your mother before executing the property transfer? No, Ethan admitted. I thought it would be easier to present it as a completed action. We were trying to help her transition to a more suitable living arrangement. Without her knowledge or consent? We were concerned she would resist what was clearly in her best interest. And who determined what was in her best interest? You? Your wife? Your in-laws? Ethan shifted uncomfortably. It was a family decision. A family decision that conveniently excluded the actual property owner, Patricia noted. Mr. Bennett, were you aware of your mother's subdivision of the property into 2 separate legal parcels 3 years ago? Ethan hesitated, clearly conscious of the emails already entered into evidence. Yes, I was aware. Yet you proceeded with a property transfer that failed to accurately identify the legal parcels involved. Why? His gaze dropped. I didn't think it was relevant. The intent was to transfer the entire property at 240 Maple Street. Intent doesn't change legal reality, Mr. Bennett. One final question. What was your actual motivation for attempting to acquire your mother's property? Ethan looked up, his eyes meeting mine briefly before focusing on Patricia. We believed it was in everyone's best interest. The house is too large for her alone. The Lakeview Village accommodation would provide amenities and support services appropriate for someone her age, and... He hesitated. And? Patricia prompted. And we needed assistance with our expenses at Oakwood Heights, he admitted quietly. The arrangement would benefit everyone involved. Except your mother, who would lose her home of 28 years, be relocated 30 miles from her workplace, and receive no fair compensation for her property. Is that your idea of a mutually beneficial arrangement, Mr. Bennett? Ethan had no answer. Vanessa's testimony came next, her polished exterior barely concealing her contempt for the proceedings. When Patricia questioned her about her role in planning the property transfer, she became defensive. This was Ethan's decision regarding his mother. I supported my husband, as any wife would. Did you suggest using the power of attorney to transfer the property without Ms. Bennett's knowledge? I may have mentioned it as an option, Vanessa conceded reluctantly. My father has experience with estate planning and property transfers. He thought it was a viable approach. And did you or your family stand to benefit financially from acquiring a valuable property for the sum of $1? Vanessa's composure cracked slightly. It wasn't about financial benefit. It was about providing appropriate housing for an aging relative while assisting a young couple establishing themselves. Ms. Bennett is 57, employed full-time, and by all accounts capable of determining her own housing needs, Patricia pointed out. Yet you and your husband attempted to relocate her to a senior community while taking possession of her home. How is that appropriate? You're twisting the situation, Vanessa snapped. We were trying to help. If Olivia is too stubborn to accept assistance, that's hardly our fault. The disdain in her voice when she said my name was palpable, reinforcing every impression I'd formed about her true feelings toward me. When Eleanor Harrington took the stand as the final witness, her testimony revealed more than perhaps she intended. She spoke with the casual authority of someone unaccustomed to having her decisions questioned, describing how she had guided Ethan and Vanessa toward the obvious solution of utilizing the power of attorney to simplify my living situation. Mrs. Harrington, Patricia asked, did you suggest to your daughter and son-in-law that they should transfer Ms. Bennett's property without her knowledge or consent? I suggested they use the legal tools available to accomplish what was clearly necessary, Eleanor replied smoothly. Olivia's resistance to sensible downsizing was becoming an obstacle to Ethan and Vanessa establishing themselves properly. Sometimes difficult parents need decisions made for them. Even when those decisions involve taking their property through deceptive means? Eleanor's smile was glacial. I would characterize it as facilitating a transition that Olivia was emotionally unprepared to make voluntarily. And the fact that this transition would provide Ethan and Vanessa with a valuable property at no cost was irrelevant to your advice? The financial aspects were secondary to ensuring appropriate living arrangements for all parties, Eleanor insisted, though her tone had hardened. Mrs. Harrington, Patricia continued, are you aware that manipulating a power of attorney to transfer property without the owner's knowledge constitutes elder exploitation under state law? Objection, Mr. Donovan interjected. Counsel is mischaracterizing the situation and making legal conclusions. Sustained, Judge Simmons ruled. Ms. Rodriguez, rephrase. Patricia nodded. Mrs. Harrington, did you consult an elder law attorney before suggesting this course of action to your daughter and son-in-law? That wasn't necessary. Our family has extensive experience with property matters. Experience that, apparently, doesn't include understanding the legal limitations of a medical power of attorney or the consequences of misusing one, Patricia observed. After closing arguments from both attorneys, Judge Simmons called a brief recess to review all evidence before issuing her ruling. As we waited, I found myself strangely calm. Regardless of the outcome, I had stood up for myself, refusing to be victimized by my own son and his in-laws. That alone represented a victory of sorts. When court reconvened 30 minutes later, Judge Simmons delivered her ruling with unambiguous clarity. This court finds overwhelming evidence that Ethan Bennett misused a limited medical power of fee attorney to execute an unauthorized and fraudulent property transfer. The purported transfer of 240 Maple Street is hereby declared null and void. All property rights remain with Olivia Bennett, including both Lot 12 and Lot 13 as legally subdivided and recorded. She turned her attention directly to Ethan and Vanessa. Furthermore, the court finds that your actions constitute an attempted financial exploitation of a family member, which is both legally actionable and morally reprehensible. While Ms. Bennett has not pursued criminal charges, she would be well within her rights to do so. Eleanor Harrington shifted angrily in her seat as Judge Simmons continued. The respondents are permanently enjoined from any further attempts to claim an interest in Ms. Bennett's property. They are ordered to execute documents formally relinquishing any claim to 240 Maple Street in its entirety and to pay Ms. Bennett's legal fees in full. Judge Simmons paused, then added a final statement. This court takes a particularly dim view of attempts to manipulate legal instruments for unauthorized purposes, especially when directed at family members. The respondents should consider themselves fortunate that Ms. Bennett has shown more restraint than many would in similar circumstances. With a bang of her gavel, the hearing concluded. Patricia squeezed my hand in congratulations as relieved tears threatened to well in my eyes. Across the aisle, the Harringtons conferred intensely with their legal team, Eleanor's expression thunderous. Vanessa sat rigid with anger, while Ethan simply looked lost. As we prepared to leave, Ethan approached hesitantly, separating himself from Vanessa and her parents. "Mom," he began, his voice low, I don't know what to say." "There's nothing to say, Ethan," I replied quietly. "The court has ruled. My home remains mine. I know, and you deserve that outcome, but I mean—" He struggled, gesturing vaguely as if trying to encompass everything that had transpired. "About all of this, about what I did." "What you tried to do," I corrected. "Yes." He looked down. "I got caught up in expectations and pressures I wasn't prepared for. The Harringtons have a way of making you see things their way, making you believe their priorities should be yours. I lost sight of everything, really." For a moment, I glimpsed the son I'd raised, thoughtful, capable of self-reflection, not this stranger who had tried to steal my home. But the breach between us couldn't be repaired with a single conversation or a belated recognition of wrong. "You have some serious thinking to do about who you want to be, Ethan. About what kind of man you're becoming under their influence. That's your journey now, not mine." "Will you ever be able to forgive me?" he asked, vulnerability naked in his expression. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Trust, once broken, isn't easily restored. You chose their values over everything. I taught you. That's not something I can simply overlook because a judge ruled in my favor." Vanessa called sharply from across the room, where the Harringtons were preparing to leave. Ethan glanced back at them, then again at me. "I need to go," he said. "But this isn't finished. I have decisions to make." "Yes," I agreed. "You certainly do." As I watched him return to Vanessa's side, walking out with the Harrington entourage, I wondered whether he would find the courage to reclaim his own moral compass or continue down the path they had set for him. Either way, I had protected myself, refusing to be the sacrificial offering to their ambition and entitlement. Outside the courthouse, Diane, my colleagues, and former students surrounded me with congratulations and support. Their presence was a powerful reminder that family extends beyond blood relations. Community, friendship, and shared values create connections that can sustain us when traditional bonds fail. In the weeks that followed, I settled back into my Life with a newfound appreciation for its simple rhythms and authentic relationships, the garden flourished under renewed attention. My students continued to inspire me daily with their insights and enthusiasm. The house, formally and legally affirmed as mine alone, felt more like a sanctuary than ever before. Ethan's communications were tentative at first. Brief texts checking on my well-being, questions about whether I needed anything. I responded politely but maintained boundaries, unwilling to pretend nothing had happened. Healing, if it was possible at all, would require time and demonstrated change, not just words. 1 month after the hearing, I received notice that Ethan had moved out of the Oakwood Heights house and filed for separation from Vanessa. Whether this represented a genuine reassessment of values or simply the collapse of a marriage built on shaky foundations remained to be seen. I chose not to involve myself, respecting his right to navigate his own path forward, just as I had claimed the right to determine mine. 3 months later, I was working in the garden when a car pulled into my driveway. Ethan emerged, looking different somehow, less polished, more authentic, wearing jeans and a worn sweater instead of his usual tailored attire. "Mom," he greeted me cautiously. "I was hoping we could talk, if you're willing." I removed my gardening gloves, studying him thoughtfully. "I'm listening." He glanced toward the house, the home he had tried to take from me, the physical embodiment of all I had sacrificed to raise him. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since the hearing, about who I became under the Harringtons' influence, about what I almost did to you." "And?" I prompted when he paused. "And I'm ashamed, not just because I got caught, but because I betrayed everything you taught me about honesty, respect, and basic human decency." He met my eyes directly for the first time. "I'll understand, if you can't forgive me. But I wanted you to know I'm trying to find my way back to the person you raised me to be." The garden air was sweet with the scent of autumn roses, a fragile beauty before winter's approach. Like those late blooms, the possibility of reconciliation seemed both precious and uncertain. "That journey is yours to make, Ethan," I said. "Finally. I can't walk it for you, but I can acknowledge your effort to begin." He nodded, accepting this limited opening without pushing for more. "Could we maybe have coffee sometime, when you're ready?" I considered his request, weighing the risk of renewed hurt against the possibility of rebuilding something worth salvaging from the wreckage of what had been destroyed. "Coffee," I agreed cautiously. "Next week, perhaps." As he turned to leave, I called after him. "Ethan, I need you to understand something." He paused, waiting. "I've fought for this house, not just because it's mine legally, but because it represents everything I've built independently. My security, my future, my agency. No one, not even my only child, has the right to decide those things aren't important enough to protect." "I understand," he said quietly. "Better late than never, I hope." Watching him drive away, I realized that the true victory hadn't been the court ruling, satisfying as it was. The real triumph was in finding the courage to stand against those who would diminish or dismiss me, to insist on my right to determine my own path, regardless of others' expectations or convenience. The house behind me, the garden surrounding, me, the life I had constructed through decades of consistent effort, all remained mine by choice and by right. And in protecting them, I had discovered a strength I hadn't known I possessed, a capacity to fight not just for physical property, but for the principle that even maternal love has boundaries that deserve respect. Some lessons come late in life, for both parents and children. But as I returned to tending my roses, I reflected that perhaps the most important ones do. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these. Just click and check them out.